When I started playing Disney Lorcana, I felt like I needed a special TCG dictionary just to understand the other players at my local game store. They threw around terms and sayings that just confused me. So in this video, I'm going to explain 10 commonly used phrases and terms by Lorcana players that don't actually originate from Lorcana itself. Hopefully this helps you feel less like a TCG noob like I did when I first started playing. Let's dive in. Terminology number 1, on the play and on the draw. What this video will show is that the majority of TCG terms have really found their home in Magic: The Gathering. And if you haven't noticed, it is the oldest TCG with the biggest following, so of course it's going to have the biggest influence. And when it comes to on the play or on the draw, this really comes from the fact that Lorcana shares the same start of turn ruling as Magic: The Gathering. As you probably know, the player who gets to go first gets to play first, and the person who goes second gets to draw on their first turn, unlike the first player. So it may be obvious here that the person who is going first would thus be on the play, and the person going second would be on the draw because they get to draw first. For some reason, when I first started playing, this took way too long for me to get into my head, and every time I would be sitting across from somebody, we would roll the dice and I would ask, would you want to go first or go second? And they'll say, oh, I'll be on the play. And I'm looking around like I have no idea what you're talking about because I just hadn't learned that terminology yet. Terminology number 2, tempo. Thanks again to Magic because it is the home of this term as well. See, Magic players use this term to explain something pretty complicated in TCGs. There's this hard thing to measure in a TCG, which is the pace or momentum, and tempo is the term to help describe that. In my early days, I remember people describing to me that I lost the game because I lost tempo, or that my opponent out-tempoed me on turn 4, and I didn't understand what they were trying to tell me. This was especially confusing if I was ahead on lore, because I was thinking, if I'm ahead on lore, then I must be out-tempoing my opponent, right? Well, you see, tempo has a lot more to do with the efficiency with which you play your cards and the value that they bring, more than, say, the lore state at any given moment. A great deck that demonstrates tempo is Amethyst Steel. This deck often plays really good cards each turn, maximizing the inkwell that's available. This is more than just playing on curve. This is establishing really strong threats each turn that are really hard for your opponent to deal with. But tempo establishes momentum and threats, or knocks back your opponent's momentum or threats. A great example of this in Amethyst Steel is playing strong 1-drops, 2-drops, 3-drops, all the way to turn 4, where you're able to sing Strength of a Raging Fire, taking out one of your opponent's major threats. That is a great tempo move. Terminology number 3, aggro or aggressive. Magic also coined this term to reference decks that attacked really fast, trying to win the game quickly. Lorcana players adopted this terminology, but not in the exact same way as in Magic: The Gathering. See, in Magic, characters or creatures challenge their opponents to win the game. I was highly confused by this when I first heard it because I would think aggressive totally meant challenging, when in reality, aggressive in Lorcana meant going really fast with your questing. Great examples of an aggro deck would be Amber Emerald Dogs, or Amber Steel aggro, or Purple Steel aggro. There's lots of different decks that can build aggressive strategies. Terminology number 4, tap or tapped. This is straight up a Magic term that Lorcana players need to drop. You see, in Magic, their resource system is they have lands, while we have ink, and the way that they use their lands is they tap them to turn them sideways, while we exert our cards sideways to use them. And so, even though the terminology really finds its home from Magic: The Gathering and thus its history, Lorcana has established a different defining word, and so we are to use exerted, even though you might hear some folks use tap or tapped to reference that a card is exerted or needs to be exerted. Terminology number 5, mill. This term comes all the way back from 1993 in Magic: The Gathering, when they printed a card called Millstone. This card allowed you to take the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck and put them in the graveyard. This card was the first of its kind, so it really began to establish a new way to win a game of Magic. You see, in Magic and in Lorcana, you can lose a game by being the first player to top out of your deck or to draw out of cards. And so the term mill was created to indicate whenever a card or strategy is focused on decreasing the amount of cards available in your opponent's deck. Lorcana players adopted this strategy primarily because we don't have any version of this in Lorcana, at least a term for it, and we don't really have any deck destruction strategies, more that we would cause our opponent to draw so many cards that they would run out, utilizing cards like A Whole New World. Terminology number 6, filter or cycle. This term doesn't really have an origin point because it's really just using some common language to describe an effect that people have been doing in TCGs for decades. In Lorcana, this term is primarily used to describe draw and discard effects that allow you to change out cards in your hand to hopefully improve it. Cards like Mulan, Bobby, and Tramp are great examples of filtering. It's not quite card draw, as you're not getting to keep all of your cards, but are getting to filter or cycle through more cards to hopefully get what you're looking for. Terminology number 7 and 8, wheel and wrath. Both of these terms come from cards directly from Magic the Gathering. Wheel of Fortune is a card that came out in December of 1993 and had the effect all players must discard their hands and draw 7 new cards. If that sounds familiar, A Whole New World practically had the exact same text written on it. So it's completely understandable why players would call it wheel for short. But when I first started, man, was I in the dark. I would hear people say, I'm gonna wheel for 7, and I had no idea what they meant, and they're wondering why I didn't ditch my hand and start drawing. Similarly, another Magic card that came out the same year has the same effect as one of our Lorcana cards. Wrath of God and Be Prepared share essentially the same effects in banishing all characters. And more recently, a new card of ours, Raging Storm, is often being called Wrath as well. With Infinity formats being more and more prevalent coming up, you're more than likely going to hear this term used by players because they're just used to that terminology. But in my opinion, I think it's time to let go of these terms, tip our hat at them, respect them for their origins, but give in to the culture of Lorcana and the cards that are being printed and utilize their names instead. Terminology number 9, Scry. Scry is a term that means to look into the future, and Magic the Gathering utilized this very term to describe a certain effect in their game. This mechanic allowed Magic players to look at the top several cards of their deck, decide which ones they wanted to keep on top, and put the rest down at the bottom. Lorcana has a few cards that have similar effects. Cards like Visions of the Future that allows you to look at the top 5 cards, put one into your hand and the rest on the bottom. Or Develop Your Brain, a very similar effect but for 2 cards in one. So I think it's completely fair that players would use the term Scry, seeming as Lorcana doesn't really have an effect to describe this mechanic. But man, for new players, can this be confusing when you tell your opponent you're gonna Scry 5 or Scry 2, and I don't really know what that means because I play Lorcana and that is not a term in the rulebook. And last but not least, terminology number 10, X1, X2, X3. Believe it or not, these are not terms describing the X-Men movies, and it doesn't come from Magic the Gathering. If you've heard these terms before, they're almost always used to describe tournament. Tournament. If you've heard these terms before, it's probably in reference to a tournament that someone is playing in. These phrases find their origin in the development of the 19th century chess tournament structure developed in Switzerland, lovingly known as the Swiss tournament format. X represents your wins, while the following number, it represents your losses. So why state your loss numbers and not your win numbers? Isn't that a bit sad or nihilistic that you're only looking at the losses? Well, the reason is in Swiss tournaments, there is usually a certain amount of losses that let you know that you are no longer in winning contention for the tournament. For example, in a 2,000 player DLC, typically speaking, if you have a record any worse than X2, which means you've lost 2 games, you are out of contention to make it into day 2 of the tournament. So often it's easier to just track your losses more than your wins because a tournament could have anywhere from 5 to 10 to 12 rounds, so keeping track of those win counts are not as vital as keeping track of your loss counts. Man, when I was entering my first tournaments and people were asking me how well I was doing and they were describing their tournament progress by X1 or X2, I just really had no idea what they were talking about. I could infer it, but man, I just felt like a noob hearing those terms, and so I hope telling you the definition of these things is helpful. So there you have it, 10 terms Lorcana players have used that I had no idea what they meant when I started playing this game, so hopefully you know what they mean now. And I hope this little list helps you feel less like a noob at your locals or even a big tournament like a DLC. I really appreciate you watching this video. Know that someone is really grateful for you today. See you soon.